Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This podcast is brought to you by hituni.com. That's hituni.com. HitUni is an e-learning course provider specializing in high-intensity training for personal trainers and for people looking to learn how to apply the principles of HIIT to their own training for best results. It comes highly recommended by Body by Science author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, MedX Precision Fitness owner Blair Wilson, HIIT expert Drew Bay, and the founder of Living La Vida Low Carb, Jimmy Moore. It was founded by author and high-intensity training master personal trainer Simon Shawcross. Simon has 15 years experience and has supervised over 15,000 workouts. Due to a combination of demand and a lack of quality in certification programs in the fields of high-intensity training, Simon and his team spent the last 3 years developing top-quality courses that will educate fitness professionals and participants to enable them to train individuals and themselves in the safest manner and produce best results. HitUni has been put together using knowledge from the very best minds in the field of exercise, including Skylar Tanner, James Steele, Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, John Little, Mike Mensa, Arthur Jones, Dr. Ellington Darden, and many more. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace and convenience. The online video presentations are engaging and make learning fun. Online support and a discussion forum are provided to resolve any sticking points and enable you to share ideas and ask for help. Depending on whether you want to become a personal trainer, are already a personal trainer who wants to upskill, or if you're a keen HIIT participant that is eager to learn more about how you can apply HIIT to your own workouts for maximum benefit, there are several great value courses to choose from. I am personally partway through the PT course and I'm really enjoying it. I primarily wanted to do the course to learn more about how to apply HIIT to my own training for better results. The courses are really easy to follow and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's hituni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, hituni.com, pick your course and enter the coupon code CW10. Thanks very much for your support. Well, hello there. This is Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, where it is my purpose to interview some of the best in the world in exercise and health optimization, performance and productivity to identify the workout protocols, eating habits, time management principles, philosophies, books, and resources that you can use to improve your effectiveness in your own life. Guests include HIIT experts, exercise scientists, highly successful CEOs, nomadic entrepreneurs, New York Times best-selling authors, elite adventure racers, and more. Today's guest, who needs no introduction, is one of the leading voices of the evolutionary health movement, Mark Sisson. For the few of you who aren't familiar with Mark, he's a best-selling author with Primal Blueprint. His blog, marksdailyapple.com, is one of the top blogs on the internet regarding evolutionary health. Mark's resume doesn't end there. He's created multiple companies under his Primal brand, including a nutritional supplement business, a book publishing company, a Primal kitchen line, and a Primal restaurant chain. Mark is a former elite endurance athlete with a 2-hour, 18-minute marathon. I'm not actually a marathon runner myself, but that sounds pretty impressive to me. And he's also a 4th place Hawaii Ironman finisher. Needless to say, this guy's a beast and a business machine, but most importantly, he's contributed a massive amount of wonderful content to the health and fitness space. In this interview, you will learn about a specific moment when Mark realized that his training and diet was killing him and how he started to turn his health around by flipping his exercise and diet on its head. We explore Mark's thoughts on high-intensity strength training and the most effective workout protocols for hypertrophy. We get into his personal workout regimen. I ask Mark about the controversy surrounding legumes. Are they good or bad? I even ask him about whether I should have had sour cream on that day's burrito salad or not.
After that, we get into business, and Mark talks about his time management tactics, how he manages all of his businesses, and his top hacks for being more productive. And then, as usual, I finish up on some bonus questions, which take a rather different turn, which is worth waiting to hear the answers to those ones. All of the show notes and links will be in the usual place on corpwarrior.com at corpwarrior.com, which will redirect you to 15minutecorporatewarrior.com, where all the rest of the podcasts are located as well. So without further ado, I'm very proud of this, and it's so good to finally get Mark on the show. Please enjoy this interview with the one and only Mark Sisson. Can you tell me about the moment when you first realized that this wasn't working, and when you suddenly made that change to start changing your lifestyle and diet and exercise, etc.?
Well, the first aha moment I had was back in 1980 when I'd spent the previous 4 years training to compete in the U.S. Olympic trials for the marathon. And I had basically rearranged my life so that I could train hard, so that I could race as often as possible around the world, and so that I could get myself to the starting line of the Olympic trials. I qualified for the Olympic trials several times, actually, in 1979 and 1980. But by the time the trials rolled around, I was so beat up and destroyed that I couldn't go to the trials. I had to skip that, and that was basically the end of my running career. And it was really, it was heartbreaking, and at the same time, it was an epiphany that a lot of the things that I've been doing, a lot of the approaches I've been taking were destructive and were tearing me down instead of building me up. And, when you fancy yourself an athlete, particularly an endurance athlete, there's not a lot of fun or pleasure really in training for endurance athletics. All you have is this feeling of sort of superiority and health and being a fit beast on a planet of unfit beasts. And when that disappeared, it's like, okay, what have I done to myself? I entered this trying to be better at being fit and being healthy, and now I'm neither. So that was the first epiphany I had. Of course, I still was jonesing on the endorphin rush that I got from endurance athletics. And so even though I couldn't train 100 miles a week, I realized I could ride a bike because I had some arthritis in my feet, and I had some tendonitis, and I had some other things that precluded me from putting in high miles running, but I could still ride a bike, I could still swim. So I sort of gravitated to triathlon for 2 years until my running injuries were the weakest link there, and then I just sort of limped away from competition entirely and kind of rededicated the rest of my life to figuring out how I could be strong and fit and lean, and do so in a way that was comfortable, or at least involved less struggle and sacrifice, and left me healthy at the same time. So that's really what kind of begat the Primal Blueprint and all of the hacks that we've generated over the years as a result of looking into the science.
Can you recall any specific aha moments? Like, oh, wait, hang on a sec. I can get the same results if I lift heavy things for 30 minutes or do high intensity interval training or sprints. Or if I, drop my carb intake right down and ate more fat. Can you recall any of those kind of aha moments? So those
aha moments became, they weren't like instantaneous light going on as much as they were an evolution of thought and thought process. But for example, after I'd resigned myself to the fact that I was never going to be competitive again at endurance athletics, I went into the field of personal training, and I trained average citizens who wanted to just lose weight. I trained some people who wanted to race in age group competition, but across all platforms, I was able to participate with those people in their training regimen. So I would go ride my bike easy with people who said they wanted to go train for an Ironman, or I would go, walk with my housewives that wanted to lose 30 pounds and get ready for some reception or some alumni program coming up or some wedding. I would do lots of long, easy, low heart rate training, and then once a week I'd sort of go to the gym and do my one high intensity workout. Typically it was intervals, and every once in a while I'd hop in a race and realize, holy crap, I'm as fast racing now as when I was training 30 hours a week and running 100 miles a week or riding 250 miles a week, but doing it on far less intensity in terms of the amount of volume. So I was doing lots of low-level aerobic volume, but very, very minimal amount of truly intense stuff. And the results were yielding PRs and other times that I thought I'd never achieve again. So that was one of the aha moments. The other was, realizing that I didn't need to be consuming 600 to 1,000 grams of carbohydrates a day to be able to put in some amount of miles, that I could actually cut my carb intake way back. Another realization was that I didn't need the total amount of calories, that I could actually maintain muscle mass and maintain fitness and maintain health and not have my appetite run rampant on me with substantially fewer calories than I thought I needed when I was training hard. So I had a lot of those sorts of epiphanies, which I've all, again, rolled into this life way that has become the Primal Blueprint, and more recently has become this book that just came out in January called Primal Endurance.
Right. Okay. I have actually seen the cover for that, but I haven't read that one yet. So I'll look into that. As it pertains to exercise, what are your thoughts about? What thoughts do you have about high intensity strength training? So that the single set to failure type exercise. What's your view on that type of exercise protocol?
Well, the short answer is it's fine. It's a great way of training. A longer answer would be it depends on what you're trying to achieve. There are many different ways to skin that cat. There are many different ways to build muscle, to build strength and power and endurance. And in some regards, there's no right answer. A lot of this has to do with where you are in your current state of training, your genetic background, what your goals are, what your time limitations are, your genetic ability to recover and not get injured. So a lot of these things factor into crafting a strategy that works for you as an individual. Now, having said that, I'm a big fan of Doug McGuff, and I'm a big fan of high intensity training. I think the slow movement has, taken off in some arenas, and it's generated a cadre of people who are seeing great results on minimal amounts of time. In fact, in some cases, 12 to 17 minutes a week of what we call TUL, time under load. 17 minutes a week was thought to be a ridiculously small amount of time spent working out, even as recently as 10 years ago. But we're seeing that results can be had if you apply the appropriate stress over the appropriate period of time. And in the case of Body by Science and Doug McGuff, he's seen that these extended repetitions, individual repetitions, where you go a 12 count going on the concentric contraction and a equal slow count on the eccentric contraction, and that's generating some significant results for a lot of people. Now, Tim Ferriss would call that the MED, the minimum effective dose of exercise needed to generate a response. I might counter by saying that's great if you want to use the 80-20 rule and say, well, if I can get 80% of my results by just doing this high intensity stuff on a semi-regular basis, taking very little time during my week, and I don't really, that's good enough for me because I'm using this as part of my life. I'm fitting it into an otherwise hectic life where I've got a business, then it's very effective. And that's a great strategy. On the other hand, if you're wanting to compete in age group events and you want to be, doing, say, obstacle courses like Tough Mudder or Spartan races, then we might say, well, that's one part of your training, but there's some other stuff that we might want to do that would boost you from the 80% results that you're currently getting on that HIT to 90 or 95% with a little bit more effort and time involved. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. No, it does. And that was a great way to put it. I just want to, probe a little bit further on that. And I completely appreciate what you're saying about the importance of genetics and where you are in terms of your training journey, whether you're at a beginner or advanced trainee, etc. in the context of just looking to maximize hypertrophy, so forget, I guess, obstacle racing performance, that type of thing, what do you feel, if anything, that high intensity training lacks toward that end?
Well, if like I'm a hard gainer and ectomorph. yeah. And I find that if I'm going for hypertrophy, what works best for me is I do these sets of 50 repetitions of a lighter weight. But it's a weight at which I begin to start feeling it at around repetition 35. And I might do a workout where I'll do 3 sets of overhead presses at 50 reps each, followed by, or interspersed, switching off with 3 sets of pull down repetitions of some kind. So it's they're sort of opposite muscle groups that are being alternated. So 50 of the overhead press and then 50 of the pull downs, and 50 of the overhead press, 50 of the pull downs. And then I might also do 50 repetitions of a bench press like, or push up like, or you call them press ups, I guess, but like movement, interspersed with 50 repetitions of a row like movement, pulling in. And that is one of the toughest workouts I've ever done, and I blow up like a balloon when I do that workout. And so I get the hypertrophy from that, just because I've recognized that that's how my genetics works. Now I might, load up with some creatine before I do that to get the cell volumization. And that's a hack that I might use, by the way, some creatine loading in advance of doing that. But on the other hand, I can't do that workout every day. Certainly can't do it every day. Wouldn't want to do it more than once a week. And if I do it once a week, I probably would limit myself to 4 weeks to maximum of 6 weeks of doing that particular type of routine once a week, and then move on to some other phase of my development, which had more to do with strength and power than hypertrophy. So again, we're back to this notion of, what is it? Am I trying to build a beach body? Am I trying to, look curls for the girls, and which way to the beach kind of muscles? Or am I looking at functionality, mobility? Am I looking at maximum sustained power because I'm a cyclist looking to generate as much power over the third hill as I am over the first hill? So all of these, you have to sort of ask yourself those sorts of questions before you really sit down and say, okay, then in that case, the ideal training regimen for me looks like this. And that's what I've done in this new book. So here I am plugging the book, but I guess I'm allowed to do that. Primal Endurance is we explain how these things work, how you become a fat burning beast, how you learn to burn fat instead of depending on glycogen and glucose for all these things, how you build maximum sustained power in the gym that then applies to work that you do when you're on the roads, cycling or running or swimming or whatever it is, even obstacle course training. But that's why it's incumbent upon every individual who wants to maximize performance to understand not only how performance works, but understand how their own body is set up and which of these inputs will generate the greatest return on the investment, because there are some inputs on some people that just are going to be a waste of time.
Just going back to what you were saying about that high repetition workout you mentioned, it was really interesting. Obviously, that's quite different to high intensity training in certain aspects, in terms of the number of repetitions. And what kind of cadence would you employ on that type of workout generally?
Yeah, so those are going really fast. So
okay.
Those are, and by the way, those are also, I do these on machines, not free weights, specifically because on a machine, I can change the handle position every repetition very quickly. So I'll go in close, out a little bit more, out a little bit more. I might even go up around the bar, depending on how the bar is shaped, so that I'll be working a different range of motion on almost every single repetition of the 50 that I do. And that I started doing that workout as a mobility workout to get me out of the rut of being constrained or confined to the one range of motion that most machines force you into. So you'll see me going on the outside, away from the handle, the grips on the machine, to the squared off bars that are just structural components, to the inner struts, to the rounded stuff. Always trying to maintain a pace, and because I've dropped the weight down sufficiently that I could even bounce it up and change, almost change weight or change grip while it's in the air above me. And you'd have to sort of, I should probably do a video on this at some point, because
definitely,
again, I started doing this to address injuries that I was perceiving, itises, because of having done certain activities in the same plane of motion or range of motion, and this was a way to kind of get out of that. So, like I might do the leg press, sort of one of those leg press machines where every time I'm pushing out, I'm changing, almost like dancing, I'm changing my foot position, toes in, toes out, left foot above the right foot above the left foot, all sorts of things that put me through different ranges of motion.
Two questions then. What are you able to explain on a molecular level, or in terms of how the exercise is affecting the muscle fiber and producing a positive adaptation in the context of your workout? And then secondly, what do you think are the benefits derived from changing the hand position and foot position during, say, a chest press and leg press in the context you just described?
I think the benefit is just simply using the muscle fibers in different orientations based on the placement of the hands in this case, or the feet if it's a leg thing. So you're not just channeling one set of dominant muscle fibers through 50 repetitions without changing the grip or without changing the placement, which could lead to some potential overuse or some sort of injury like that. So I'm trying to involve as many fibers in that muscle, in that family, in whatever it is I'm generally isolating that group. So that's why the change in grip. Every exercise that we do generates a metabolic byproduct that will then prompt gene expression. So it's interesting that when you do these, if you're lifting really heavy, if you're doing 1 rep maxes and you're only doing very, very hard glycolytic work, so you're doing 1 or 2 or 3 rep maxes, you're done in 10 seconds, but it's all you have, and it takes every ounce of strength you have to complete that repetition. You're sending a particular set of instructions to the genes via the metabolic byproducts of the work you just did. That's why even though muscles will get sore and tired running a marathon or doing heavy leg presses, and they might even seem like a similar type of tiredness if you're trying to climb a set of stairs, the metabolic byproducts of the work done will generate far different signals to the genes. So in the case of the marathon runner, it's going to increase aerobic capacity. It's going to theoretically generate a greater proliferation of capillaries for oxygen throughput. That'll be one of the gene signals. It may involve converting fast twitch fiber into slow twitch fiber because the body sees that as the predominant activity that's being required through the training method, and it says, well, we don't need fast twitch fiber. We're not going to be sprinting, so let's shift some of that fast twitch fiber over to slow twitch fiber. So a lot of these things happen as a result of the types of metabolic byproducts: the lactic acid accumulation, the fatty acid throughput, possibly even the generation of ketone bodies. Versus when you do a heavy leg day, and it's mostly glycolytic, and there's a far greater breakdown. The actual muscle fibers are actually involving micro tears, which then generate their own set of sort of inflammatory responses and free radical damage that actually causes a positive shift in gene regulation and muscle growth and hypertrophy. So it's really, as you get into these specific types of workouts, you can, and again, some of this has to do with your genetic predispositions. If you're an ectomorph, then there's only so far you're going to get doing heavy leg days, which isn't to say you shouldn't do them. In fact, you probably should do them, but there's only so far you'll get, right? And if you're an endomorph, you're probably not going to ever be a great marathoner. It's just the way of the world. So once we understand our physical limitations, then we can maybe pick and choose activities that we'll excel at, that we'll be really good at, and not have to be frustrated because, I mean, I've known a number of ex-football playing linemen who say, well, I want to run a marathon to lose weight, and they start out at 325 pounds and they get down to 275 pounds. And, they're just never going to be marathoners. And it was maybe an interesting project, a life, a bucket list item, but it wasn't the most appropriate use of their genetics and their training and their background. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You're a big fan of sprints, a big proponent of doing sprinting.
Yep.
And in the Primal Blueprint, you talk about, and I know a lot of this has probably been answered through your blog, so sorry if I'm treading over questions I'm sure you've been asked before. But you talk about how sprints stimulate a muscle gain and also support fat loss. And I think I understand that from a metabolic point of view. So post sprinting, I believe you would have elevated your metabolic rate, which can help with fat loss. But are you able to describe exactly the mechanisms as to how sprinting is able to increase muscular gain and support fat loss?
Well, true sprinting, when you're going all out, will be generating a pulse of growth hormone and testosterone, which are muscle building by their very nature. The fact that you are sprinting, which is a very intense activity, as opposed to walking or jogging or even going at say 10K race pace, you're putting a force on the muscles that is 5x or 10x what normal walking or jogging would be, and that has the same or a similar effect of doing a weight workout, except you're doing it very quickly. So you're training the central nervous system is involved in here as well as the muscles. So there are a number of different responses. One of which is the fight or flight system, because when you do sprint, if you're sprinting hard enough, that's sort of sending a signal to the body going, well, it must be a life or death situation. We must be running away from something that's trying to kill us. So we need to shore up the defenses for future encounters like this. So there's a response from the hypothalamus pituitary axis, the HPA axis. There's all sorts of immediate endocrine adjustments to the work done, which then signal the release of certain hormones, which also are involved in upregulation and downregulation of the genes that are going to be involved in the repair, that are going to be involved in the building of new enzymatic pathways to be able to handle this workload better the next time you do it. I mean, that's the sort of the Nietzsche philosophy brought to life, which is if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger, right? I mean, that's truly that's survival of the fittest. That's the original mantra of the caveman, which was, if I run fast enough to survive this survival situation, I'm going to be stronger so that next time I encounter this beast, I'll be even in a better position to escape. Conversely, if I'm not strong enough and I get mowed down, my genes are eliminated from the gene pool, and off you go.
another thing you mentioned in Primal Blueprint is the low level aerobic activity, which you actually talked about a little bit at the start of this, which is being constantly mobile every day, as much as you possibly can be. I mean, I've actually work in central London, and I actually changed my commute after reading your book to make it so that I come off the train sooner, and so I walk the rest. Because I used to do that, probably because I read some of your blog posts in the past, and then I stopped doing it, and I realized, oh geez, I really should be doing that. So I got back into it. Anyway, I digress. But in the book, you talked about how this kind of low level aerobic activity helps metabolize fat, which I guess confused me a little bit, because I understand that, you know, when you do intense activity, you can you use the glycogen stored in the muscle and liver, and then you signal the body to then replenish that, and that helps with fat metabolism. But my understanding is that low level aerobic activity can't tap those glucose stores as well. So how is it that that's able to help metabolize fat? What was the mechanism driving that?
Well, first of all, if you're not getting energy from glucose, where are you getting it?
Food. No.
Oh,
yes.
well, but you're getting it from fat. So,
right. Okay.
So in other words, no, there's three sources of fuel potentially in the body: fat, protein, and carbohydrate. And in an ideal world, protein is a building macronutrient. It's not supposed to be used for energy. So that leaves you two sources of energy: glucose and fats. And glucose and the terms glucose and carbohydrate are interchangeable. Carbohydrate gets converted mostly into glucose by the digestive system and goes into the bloodstream as glucose and is stored as glycogen. So you have these two basic systems for generating the amount of fuel to recycle ATP, which is the currency that the muscle fibers use, and that's glucose and fat. So if you're not burning glucose, you must be burning fat. And in fact, most people are pretty good at burning fat at low levels of just hanging out. We burn a fair amount of fat. We don't really rely that much on glucose. But as we ramp up the activity level, we start to burn more and more glucose, to the extent that when you really ramp it up and you're doing glycolytic stuff, you're doing all glucose. That's all you're using. So to your point, the secondary long-term effect of having done a hard glycolytic workout is you're out of glycogen, and theoretically the body will start to look to first of all recycle ATP using fat sources, but also will hopefully through gluconeogenesis be able to refill some of the glycogen stores that you've depleted. But that's that's certainly available to anybody who does the high intensity work. And as I say very often, nothing cuts you up like sprinting. Nothing burns body fat over the long haul. But to be really good at burning fat, you still have to train your body to know how to access stored body fat and burn it as fuel, preferentially over glucose. And to that effect, the first thing we do is we look at the diet. So the Primal Blueprint, certainly the Primal Endurance diet, is largely based on reconfiguring your fuel partitioning so that you derive most of your energy from stored fat when you are resting, and most of your energy from stored fat when you are walking, and most of your energy from stored fat even when you are jogging or running at a reasonably fast pace. Right. You need to do this in order to reduce your reliance on glucose and glycogen on longer endurance events. So by eliminating sugars and sweetened beverages and pastas and cereals and breads and cookies and crackers and biscuits, as you call them, and other things, in your diet, and getting rid of all of those simple sugars that the body has learned to rely on over the years, and cutting it back to where your main source of carbohydrate and hence glucose is coming from vegetables and a few starchy tubers. You sort of shift we say you basically reprogram your genes to force you to rely on more on fat as a form of fuel. And when you do this shift, you're literally sending signals to the genes that upregulate the enzyme systems that not only take fat out of storage and send them to the muscles to be burned as fuel. But you also increase the amount of mitochondria that are the energy little powerhouses in the cells. You also increase the efficiency of those mitochondria, which, by the way, they have their own DNA, and that DNA gets a signal that says we need to be more efficient because we're going to start to burn more fat. And you become what we call a fat-burning beast. Now, that's part one of this, is you got to get the diet right. Part two of this is once you get the diet right, then if you do the low-level aerobic activity, even up to a point that we have determined to be 180 minus your age, so up to that heart rate, almost everything you do is burning mostly fat and isn't relying so much on glucose or stored glycogen.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
No, that's a good answer, actually. Do you practice? Oh, so this is a question from a listener of mine, chap named William Go. He's asked, do you practice high intensity training, and if so, how frequently? So in the traditional sense, the single set to failure type training. Yeah,
the single set to failure, I don't, and partly because I'm not even training that much anymore, and for me, I just don't have I probably need a coach to be yelling at me or coaching me through those single set to failure things. And the only way that works is if I do, again, 80% of my max. Sorry, that's
no worries.
In my gate. If I do 80% of my my 1 rep max, and I do it 12 seconds, up and 12 seconds back, or something like that, in a very, very slow guided movement. I've tried it. It just, for some reason, it's not as appealing to me as some of the other stuff I do. Now, having said that, I do an intense workout once a week. I play ultimate frisbee, where I'm sprinting and changing direction for 2 hours with my mates on the field. Right.
Yeah.
So that workout is so intense for me that typically I can't walk very well Monday. By Tuesday, I'm easing myself into on a bike and doing some easy stuff. Or yesterday, instead, I just did a hour and a half hike, and then today I just came back from the gym where I did just a easy 20-minute workout where I work sort of all body parts. And again, my workouts now are contemplated to keep me from getting injured more than anything else. So I'm not training necessarily to set a PR on anything. I'm not training to compete in anything. I want to, like tomorrow, I'll go for a 2-hour paddle. And that 2-hour paddle will work my upper body better than anything I could do in the gym, from my perspective. And it'll work, it'll stabilize some of the janky shoulder muscles that I've been experiencing over the past couple of months, because it's a very effective means of working as many muscles as possible in the body without getting injured. So the whole thing is contemplated to keep me from getting injured, basically, and that's the essence of my training these days.
So that still sounds pretty intense. You said you kind of hinted that you weren't as into it these days, but that sounds pretty regular to me. What you're saying?
Well, I do have a regular schedule, but if I travel, I don't mind taking 3 days off. If I travel, I don't even try to find a gym at a hotel anymore. If I'm traveling, I just say, okay, this is my rest period. I'm confident enough that I'm not going to lose conditioning if I take time off. I'm confident enough that knowing now what I know about training, that I don't have to do that much to maintain the level of training that I've achieved. But at my age, I also know that I'm not going to set any more PRs or PBs when I'm in the gym. So it's really back to how can I have fun? How can I find activities that are fun, like paddling is for me, or like ultimate frisbee is for me, or like snowboarding is for me, and in some regards, like hiking is for me. How can I do that in a way that I don't get injured, but use those activities as advancing my fitness?
Okay. Right, I'm just a little conscious of time, so I'm going to skip over to some other sections and change gears slightly, if that's okay. So I was having a Chipotle today, salad bowl. And I normally, because historically I've done Tim Ferriss's slow carb diet for a very long time. My girlfriend does it as well. She's vegetarian, which I find to be quite impressive that she's able to do it being vegetarian. And it's worked quite well. It's worked well in terms of getting me to a fairly low percentage of body fat, with whilst sort of enjoying food. But today I changed things slightly. I've obviously read your book recently again, and I felt, hang on, let's change this up and see how your way of eating will perhaps improve our results. So I replaced the legumes with sour cream. And then I quickly kind of thought, hang on, is sour cream good? Is that high in lactose? Is that going to have the same effect on insulin that carbs will have? What's your take on sour cream and its effect on, its kind of part that it plays in your sort of diet, if you will?
On sour cream? You're asking me about sour cream, Lawrence. Okay, well, it depends on where it comes from. I mean, it could be fine, and it could be from a source that is acceptable. I mean, I don't have any sort of hard and fast rule about food. I look at food as existing on a spectrum of better choices and not so good choices. So, and by the way, everything we do here is just based on choices. There's no right or wrong answer here. There's no, there's no judgment on what your choices are. All I do within the Primal Blueprint is I try to offer up evidence as to, well, maybe this choice might be a slightly better choice than that one. So with regard to sour cream, a little bit of sour cream, is fine. I will do a Mexican meal every once in a while, and I'm certain to include sour cream. I'll do some black beans because I like black beans. I'm not as adamant about the omission of legumes as most of the paleo world is, for instance. I've come around to thinking that legumes in moderation might be a welcome addition to someone's diet. I mean, I want to eat food. I want to enjoy food. I want to have the experience of the widest variety of food as possible. So I look for things that I can include in my diet, not for things that I should exclude, almost without question, without questioning why. So the sour cream, it's fine once in a while. Would I do sour cream every day? Absolutely not. If it's a high-fat sour cream from a great source, grass-fed source, then so much the better. If it's some nasty, low-fat sour cream, homogenized, pasteurized, and otherwise adulterated, not so much. But I also wouldn't beat myself up over having found out later on that that's what that was. I just move on to the next decision. I think a lot of times people overthink these things, and unless you have a real immediate visceral reaction to something like, gluten and I don't get along that well. So if I find myself eating a fair amount of gluten, I pay the price. So I stay away from that. On the other hand, some of these things that we would suggest are maybe no-nos on the paleo diet. If they don't impact you negatively in the short term, and you're only going to do it once in a great while, and so it won't impact you negatively in the long term, then I say, why not? Give it a shot. It's like, I'm not going to not have birthday cake at my kid's 5th birthday party because I'm sort of on an anti-sugar thing right now. Life is to be lived, and some of these things we can make these choices. Like with the birthday cake thing, I'd say, well, okay, I'll have a slice. I'll have three bites, 4 bites, whatever. I get a sense of what the cake tastes like. It's great. It's awesome. It's sweet. And that's all I need to get that experience. I don't need to finish the entire, quarter of a cake that was put on my plate.
Yeah. In just on legumes, actually, which you mentioned there, obviously they're a big part of Tim Ferriss's slow carb diet, which he advocates having them in most meals, be it black beans, pinto beans, or lentils, stuff like that. You talk about in Primal Blueprint. I appreciate that your views have evolved, and as you've learned more and more and experienced more. But you talk about the lectins in legumes and the other properties that cause an autoimmune response, I believe. Or is that the gluten? I'm getting my facts mixed up there.
No. I mean, we talk a lot about gluten, and I'm still pretty adamant about gluten, for not just for myself, but for most people. On the legume side, the lectin discussion, which was the original point of contention that a lot of people had with legumes, I think that's eased over the years, and I think, and I'm certainly one who was in doing further research, have arrived at a point where I don't think that the lectins in properly prepared legumes are problematic for most people, and almost conversely, I think that some of the digestible fibers, starches and soluble starches and fibers that act as substrate for the bacteria, the gut bacteria, are probably a good reason to include legumes at certain times. That maybe in a strict paleo diet, there's maybe not quite enough substrate to feed a healthy gut biome. And that's a major consideration that, by the way, has only really arisen in the last 2 or 3 years of investigation.
Interesting. So when I remember reading Gary Taubes' Why We Get Fat, and he talks about how you can subtract, in most cases, subtract the fiber count from the carbs to get your net carbs, and use that as a measure of figuring out, how much is this going to affect my serum insulin. Now, in the context of legumes, obviously they've got a lot of fiber in them and a fair amount of carbohydrate. Does that really pan out? Does that mean that in the case of legumes that actually they don't really affect insulin that much, and generally speaking?
Yeah, generally speaking, they don't. Right. Generally speaking, and depending on how they're prepared and what the ultimate iteration that they're taking, they're fairly high in these fibers, in these soluble fibers, which do not impact insulin release. And if they're relatively low in carbohydrate, and if the remaining carbohydrate is of a low glycemic index, then you're free and clear.
And you still advocate you have the graph in Primal Blueprint where you talk about the different levels of grams of carbohydrates to go into fat burning zone and the maintenance zone, etc. Is that still? Does that?
I came up with that 10 years ago, and to this day, it's one of the things I'm most proud of. I think it really holds true. I think that most people don't need more than 150 grams of carbs a day, and there are certainly some people who can get away with more than that, but in general, most people don't need more than 150, particularly if they become good at burning fat, which is what we teach within the Primal Blueprint. How can I become a fat-burning beast? How can I rely more on dietary fat, healthy dietary fats, and stored body fat, and less on carbohydrates? And with that in mind, if you eliminate the sugars, the sugary drinks, the sweetened beverages, the candies, cakes, cookies, pastas, rice, bread, cereal, all that other kind of stuff that I think all by now know intuitively to back off on, if not eliminate, we're left with vegetables and some starchy tubers and a few legumes and some fruits, and even with among those or within that category, you'd be hard pressed to eat more than 150 grams a day unless you're a full-on vegetarian, or unless you're really working at it. I have salads on a regular basis, big giant salads that comprise most of my lunch, and they don't contain more than 40 or 50 grams of carbs at the end of the day with all of the stuff that's in there. So, I might have another 80 to 100 grams before the end of the day, before the day is over. But if I've eliminated all those things I just talked about, the sugars, the sugary drinks, the beverages, the pies, the cakes, the candies, the cookies, I'm coming in at around 100 to 150 grams of carbs a day, and I maintain my weight, I maintain my energy levels, I maintain my mass, I maintain my immune system is fine, and most importantly, my appetite doesn't kick in. I'm not like, oh my gosh, I have to eat because my insulin is my blood sugar is is dropping because I'm so used to eating a regular supply of carbohydrate. All that goes away when you become good at burning fat.
Yeah, I agree with that. What you were saying there about having that other amount of carbohydrate or the rest of your carbohydrates in the evening, is that alluding to perhaps carb backloading and having like you say the tubers or other carbohydrate in your evening meal? Is that type of thing you would do necessarily? Maybe have some, I don't know, white rice or with sweet potato or something like that with your evening?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even aim for that as much as I'm like dinner for me is typically a small piece of steak and broccolini or broccoli or Brussels sprouts or cauliflower or some vegetable like that. And by the way, a decent sized bowl, I think what most people would probably consider 3 servings of that particular green vegetable or that particular vegetable. But even then, that doesn't add up to more than 30 or max 40 grams of carbs. So where does the rest of it come? I mean, I do have, I found this non-alcoholic beer that I like. Because I'm on a sort of cut way back on the amount of alcohol I consume, but I like the ritual of drinking something with dinner, and I'm not particularly a water drinker. So, that might add 10 grams of carbs, but I mean, I don't really track carbs as much as I intuitively know at the end of the day, this is what I had. And I could go back in the annals of the U.S. Department of Agriculture and figure out what that represented in terms of calories or carbs, and the net carbs comes in at a relatively low amount of net carbs. And yet, like I start my day off with a cup of coffee. I don't eat until 1 o'clock in the afternoon typically. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, I have cut way back on the amount of calories I take in a day. Like surprisingly little based on what I used to eat when I was a competitive athlete.
How many on average, what's the number of calories you might consume on average per day at the moment?
2,200, 2,300, something like that. I mean, I could get away with 3,500, 3,600 not that long ago, And when I say get away with, that means eat that and not gain weight and not get fatter, but still be fine and still feel like that's what I needed. It wasn't until I did this sort of thought experiment, which I said, well, my whole life I've been seeing what I can get away with in terms of how much I can eat and not gain weight. I bet the world does that. The rest of the world at least the Western world that has access to food, would say, what's the most I can eat and not be uncomfortable and not gain weight? Well, the opposite of that is what's the least amount I can eat and still maintain muscle mass and still maintain energy and still maintain cognition and not get sick, and most importantly, not be hungry. Because it all falls apart if you're hungry, right? You can't. This has to be a sustainable way. But what you find is that you can survive quite nicely and thrive quite nicely on far fewer calories than you probably thought possible if you sort of orchestrate the intake periods and the macronutrients in a way that addresses all the concerns.
Yeah. What are your current views on white rice? Because my understanding is that the process that white rice goes through is that the anti-nutrients are milled out, and actually it's one of those rare instances where the white carb is better than the brown carb. Do you agree with that? And what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And the only, as I've said for years, I don't pick the rice off my sushi rolls, but I don't order sushi with rice on them either. I usually get I go to a place where they know how to make every one of the rolls they can make it without rice when I ask them to. But no, rice is a fine. I just happen to think white rice is the most bland, ridiculous carb there is. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of white rice at all. I just don't think it tastes good. You have to put something on it to make it taste good. In which case you can render it reasonably good with onions and nuts and raisins and whatever else you want to put on there. But I'm not going to, if Lawrence, if you like white rice, I'm not going to judge your culinary, your taste buds in any way, shape or form. it's fine. It's a cheap source of carbs. It converts to glucose pretty quickly in the bloodstream if that's what you're after, and if that's going to round out your meal, and if you understand that's what you're getting into, and you're fine with that, go for it. It's and then you can mix it up with if you're consuming a meal that has some fats in it and some protein, it won't raise your blood glucose substantially. So go for it.
That's a good answer. Sorry to throw all these random questions at you. These ones are more kind of my personal, I've always wondered kind of thing. Or, opportunity here is to ask you, so I thought I would. Strange question, but if I do abuse my diet, if I fall off the wagon and go on a holiday and I kind of just eat whatever I want, I will create a little bit of a muffin top, right, in terms of a little tiny belly. Although I actually, the weird thing is I heard Dave Asprey talk about how that is actually more often a cause of inflammation rather than additional body fat, if that makes sense. Is that, do you know much about that in terms of could that just be a result of an issue in a diet that you feel is optimal from a fat burning point of view, rather than it being excess body fat? It being a product of inflammation.
I agree. No, I agree 100%. If you short-term gains like that, short-term fat gains or weight gains like that are mostly water. They're mostly, when you roll an ankle and you sprain an ankle, a whole host of inflammatory responses begin, which include, among other things, the swelling of that area as fluid accumulates within that area as a part of a protective mechanism. So if you have systemic inflammation, if you've eaten foods that are causing inflammation in your bloodstream and causing an inflammatory response, your body will retain water. So when you see shows like The Biggest Loser and you see people lose 25, 26 pounds the first week, you go, well, they didn't burn 26 pounds of fat. They just altered their diet. They got rid of all of the bad stuff. And it almost didn't matter what they were eating. It's mostly what they eliminated, what they weren't eating, that reduced the inflammation, that allowed them to release the water that they had been carrying, in some cases, their whole life, all their lives. So I agree that if you go – now, when you start to eat clean, one of the things you do notice is sort of a good news, bad news thing. So you start to eat clean, you clean up your act, you clean up your diet, you lose body fat, you're feeling good, your skin's great, your energy levels are high, you're thinking clearer, your immune system is functioning. Now, if you go off the wagon, now you really notice it, right?
Definitely.
You didn't notice it before because the body it doesn't want to feel pain. The body is like, okay, I just whatever I can do to dull the pain, the body tends to get used to that over time. But if you've removed those stressors and then you put them back quickly over a weekend or over a holiday or something like that, then you really start to see what was going on in your body beforehand, because now the results are very noticeable. And so that inflammation is one of the things that happens. You've cleaned your act up so well that now that when you reintroduce some inflammatory foods, that's the effect. Yeah, you're not storing 3,500 calories of butter-like fat on your midsection just because you ate poorly for a week. That's a water retention that as a result of a systemic inflammatory response to the crappy foods you're eating.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good answer. Okay, cool. So let's shift gears again because I want to ask you a couple of questions about business, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So you have this incredibly successful blog, probably the top blog on sort of primal eating and lifestyle on the internet, and obviously you've had a few other many other successful businesses and books that I believe have come out of that. Looking back, what were the most critical actions that got your blog to where it is today? So what were the big kind of force multipliers at the beginning of your kind of online business career?
Well, when I started the blog, I didn't know what I was getting into because this was 10 years ago. And blogging was sort of in its infancy. and I was naively assuming that within a few months I'd have 100,000 viewers a day, and that didn't happen. And it was at the end of a year I had 1,000 viewers a day, and then it doubled every year. So it was a slow process that was largely a result of hard work and perseverance. And had you told me that it was going to take this long to build an audience, I probably would have chosen some other avenue. So what I learned was, if you do something and you're good at it and you do it long enough, it'll pay off. Now, how it's paid off for me is that I've spent the last 8 years building a brand, last 10 years actually. And only in the last 2 or 3 years have I begun to deploy that brand with the sorts of products. Like I started a food company 2 years ago, and that food company is taking off, Primal Kitchen. I've got a restaurant franchise concept that is now taking off. That's also called Primal Kitchen. So a lot of these things that I've been working on for years and years and years in the background, while I was building the integrity of the brand, while I was getting my sort of name out there and the whole concept of primal. So I trademarked, Primal Nutrition, Primal Blueprint, Primal Fuel, Primal Kitchen. All of those are marks that I own, and that I wanted to carve out a space within this generic world of paleo or ancestral health. I wanted to have something that related to what I espoused and the sort of subset of life template that I was creating to have a strong brand identity. And that was what was most that was the great unknown when I started the blog, but that became clear after a couple of years of doing the blog, was that was where the strength of the blogging came in.
Just taking a backward step, just curious, when you were competing at a very high level, were you a professional athlete and that was where you got your income? Did you have another job or business during that endeavor?
Yeah, so when I was competing, when I was an elite athlete, one of the best in the country, there was no income. You could not. It was in athletics in the U.S. and the same in Britain as well. If you wanted to go to the Olympic Games, you could not have ever earned any money competing as an athlete. So we would travel around the world. We would get airfare and then race for a gift certificate at a restaurant or a pair of shoes. So during that time, and this is all up until the mid 80s, during that time, I supported myself as a contractor. So I was not only training hard, but I was monkeying up and down ladders all day in the hot sun, doing physical labor, which I think is part of my training, and contributed to my ability to race fast. But yeah, no, I was even as an elite athlete up until the 80s, it was a hobby for anyone who was in any form of endurance athletics, whether it was swimming, cycling. Cycling had the Tour de France, but endurance athletics and even track and field. So track and field, some of the best track and field athletes in the world didn't. They raced around the world, dedicated their lives to this pursuit. In exchange for a free plane ticket and a hotel room to go compete and then perhaps win again some prizes, a television set or a pair of shoes or something. There was a limit on that too.
So when you got more into the Ironman stuff and triathlons and things like that, was it still the same situation? But I think you said you began personal training. So was that your income during that endeavor, or were you making money doing those events?
Yeah, so I had a bunch of businesses throughout those years. I owned a frozen yogurt shop in Palo Alto. I wrote books, even back as far as 1982. I had a restaurant near Apple Computer in San Jose in 83, 84. So I was still a contractor. So I had I was always involved in business. and always looking for a way to leverage my time and my talents to create a business. So that's always been something I've done. Been an entrepreneur since I was 12.
Oh, I never knew that. That's really interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what obviously a big part of this podcast is understanding things that you do differently in your life that contribute massively to your productivity. Hang on a second, I just managed to lock myself out of my laptop whilst I'm looking at my notes, which isn't helpful. Anyway, so what are the lifestyle hacks, the things that you do on a daily basis that allow you to free up your time and that really improve the quality of life and the productivity within your business? Obviously, you're managing a lot of businesses now, I assume. So
yes, I am.
What are some of those key hacks and habits that you have?
They're sort of all over the place. And first of all, I work out of my house, so I don't have a commute. So I think the elimination of a commute is huge. I have an office. I have offices in Malibu where some of my employees work, and then I have other offices and warehouse in Oxnard. Each one of those is a 10 to 20 minute drive away. But I've surrounded myself with a great team. So my job is to manage resources. I manage people and money, and I make decisions, critical decisions, and sort of high level decisions. But those get executed by people who work for me. Now, one of the things I learned a while back, one of the hacks that I liked is I have a CFO right now who would be a very highly paid individual if I had him working for me full time on my payroll, but I give him tasks. He's a virtual CFO, and these are things that I could do but hate to do, and he does them expertly and basically. I buy 10-hour blocks of time from him. Can
you elaborate on what type of tasks that he might do?
Yeah. So, when I bought a warehouse, I bought 2 warehouses last summer. He went through all of the tasks that needed to be done to bring it online, from setting up the power and water and trash and then orchestrating the VoIP system that was put in, the insurance issues that needed to be dealt with. We create forecasting spreadsheets. I'm switching topics now, but we do forecasting spreadsheets for Primal Kitchen, and he's an expert of that. So we have these elaborate forecasting spreadsheets that I could do, but I just don't have the hours in the day, and maybe I don't want to. So, so he does that. Today, he's actually coming over here in the next hour and a half. We're going to meet with my insurance broker to go over my 20 different insurance policies, to be sure that there are no gaps or that there are inappropriate overlaps, because that's what he specialized in. And he's been doing this for 30 years. He was CFO of other companies. He decided he didn't want to work full time for another company. He's 55 years old. He's a bike racer. He loves to race bikes, and so he's thrilled to be given these blocks of time by me, for which he gets paid very well, but by the hour, not on a salary. I, in turn, am thrilled to be able to have the equivalent of a guy who would cost me, $400,000 or $500,000 a year, if he were actually running my company, and I get to pick and choose when I need him.
And that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people are moving more towards that way of working. It sounds far more fulfilling. And
the gig economy, which sort of started out at the lowest level, is now finding traction in some of the highest levels.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So another hack that I do is, and I just want to mention to your listeners here,
sure. I
do hike once or twice a week. I do it alone. It's my most productive time when I'm hiking. It's when my greatest ideas come to me. And I bring either a phone or a recording device with me, because invariably, if I don't, I will have the greatest idea in the world. I will have developed it through and through. And then when I get home, I will have forgotten most of it. So I make sure to bring some sort of recording device with me. But people would say, well, are you taking time out to go hike? And I'm going, no, I'm actually going to go hike to do some work. Right. it's a great way to multitask for me. It's meditative. I don't necessarily start out with some assignment in mind. In fact, I start out with a clean mind, almost as if meditating. But then as I get into a hike, these ideas start to flow. And so for me, that's been extremely productive.
Right. Okay. So you're not like taking business calls and that kind of thing. It's just more thought processing. You're just going through ideas through your head, right?
Correct.
Right.
Now I have taken business calls on my stand-up paddleboard.
Really?
Yeah.
Was that via like a Bluetooth headset or something like that? Or
Well, I got a plastic bag, and a regular, just earbuds, and I just make sure I don't fall in the water, right? So, I mean, I literally, most of the time when I paddle, I can go out for an hour and a half to 2 hours, step on and get wet up to my calves, and then paddle for 2 hours and step off, and that's the end of it. So I don't fall in, if at all, when I'm paddling.
so I assume you'll also use those for like listening to, I don't know, do you listen to podcasts or I suppose listen to music whilst you're paddling, that kind of thing?
No, I don't. If I don't do that, then that's another time when I'm just out, and I typically paddle alone, and I typically paddle as a means of meditative and contemplative time. But invariably, it's my most productive time. That's where I come up with my best blog posts, some of my book ideas, or I'll solve a problem that's been nagging at me.
What tools do you use these days, software or other, and that you find to be massively beneficial towards making you more productive?
I'm a real Luddite when it comes to software and that kind of thing. I still carry a composition notebook around with me with a sharp pencil, and I like to noodle and doodle in that. So a lot of times if I go to lunch alone, that'll be other times that I'm doing some stuff on paper rather than on some computer program or some PDA app. I guess the only, like technology wise, I have a great stand-up desk. I have a desk made by Focal Upright Furniture, and so my work setup is spectacular. It's a stand-up desk with a leaning post seat sort of thing, so I don't have to stand up all day. I can lean, but even when I lean, my hips are wide open, and I'm ergonomically correct. And then I have a mat made out of stones and pebbles on which I stand barefoot. So I'm getting this tactile sensory input from my feet all day. And so it creates, in fact, I'm talking to you right now, standing on my mat, leaning on my Focal Upright desk. So I've configured my workspace to be very suitable to my work style. And I think that's a critical component as well.
Just for the record, I'm also at my standing desk, but it's not quite as flash as yours from what you're saying. What does the first 90 minutes of your day look like?
So I usually get up around 6:30, have a big cup of coffee. I still read 2 newspapers. I do, and then I do all of the puzzles in the LA Times. There's 6 puzzles, and I try and do them. If I've hit 20 minutes or 25 minutes, I'll stop. But my record for all those is 17 minutes and 30 seconds, which includes a jumble, which is a scrambled word thing, 2 Sudokus, 2 Ken-Kens, and a crossword puzzle. So yeah, I start off with that, and I read the Wall Street Journal, and then I head out to my desk and answer some overnight emails. And make the initial phone calls that I need to make for the day to get the day going. And by then, that first 90 minutes if that gets me to 8 o'clock, I feel like, I'm well on my way to having a great day.
So, the puzzles you just mentioned, are they, obviously, I'm assuming you enjoy doing those, otherwise you wouldn't be doing them every day. But are they also, do you do that also for a kind of like keeping your, the mind sharp and
absolutely. That's one of the Primal Blueprint laws is use your mind, and so that's I'm addicted to them. I love doing them, but I also do them just because they're good for sharpening me up to begin the day.
But the challenges you face in business would do the same thing, though, right? In terms of I'm sure you come across a lot of challenges in managing your businesses.
Yeah, I guess so. I think that the great thing about these puzzles is that there is a right answer, and in business there isn't necessarily a right answer. There's a choice, and that's kind of the difference. So there's a real finite quantitative analysis that you can do on puzzle solving that you can't necessarily find in business. I mean, I can certainly suggest that I've made some good decisions. I've made some poor decisions. I try not to second guess the poor decisions. I try to just move on because, again, they're just choices. And if you are of the mindset that there truly are no right or wrong answers, they're just, it's like one door shuts and the two doors open. I mean, if you are open to the possibilities in business, then there's an infinite number of possibilities.
Obviously, looking at Corporate Warrior, for example, which is a blog and a podcast, and it's still very much in its infancy, but gaining popularity quite quickly, which I'm really pleased to say. What advice would you have for me, someone who's starting growing a business in kind of the health and fitness niche of productivity, but also spanning across lifestyle and business, as you know? What advice do you have for me for growing that and making that more successful?
Well, the first thing I tell anybody is make sure you have a business. So you can be passionate and you can be excited and you can be all in and committed, but if you don't have a business behind it, then all of that passion and all of that excitement could have gone elsewhere. So I would need to know, like if I were going to coach you, Lawrence, I'd say, okay, what is it that you ultimately want to sell? How are you going to make £1 million a year, right? Or at a minimum, right? And then from that, if you describe some products and some ideas that you have, maybe you're going to do books, maybe you're going to do speaking engagements, maybe you're going to do programs, whatever it is, then we decide, okay, is there a business model? Does that work? Are there people successful at doing that? And if the answer is yes, then we really start to drill down and go, okay, then this is about you sticking to it, you making the podcast as strong as you can, you branding that podcast because branding is everything now. It's always been important. It's everything now. The commoditization of products and even services now is such that at that end, in the commodity end, it's a race to zero margin. But where the real success comes is from branding and being recognized and having a following and having thousands of people who listen to what you say and who will not only take that advice to heart and run with it, but will purchase your goods and services because they want to. They are craving more of that.
That's really good advice. Right. Okay. So last, I guess I'm going to move on to some bonus questions now. So some of these are they're rapid fire, but they don't have to have rapid fire answers, as Tim Ferriss would say. So let me just go through a couple of those. I'm dying to ask you some of these. What have you changed your mind about in the last year in the context of health and fitness?
Well, that's probably where I've eased up on the legume thing. That's where I've realized that I bought into the paleo thing pretty early on, that legumes were bad, and now I'm backing off on that. And I pride myself on my willingness to do that, but also defend my right to change my mind. So that's what I would say about that. Yeah.
What about the same question for business? Anything?
What have I?
Like a belief or mindset you've had for a long time in business that you kind of felt, okay, that's not serving me anymore, or you changed your mind about that specific aspect in the last year, if anything at all. I mean, it might not be it. You might not have an answer to that, and that's fine too.
So further to the virtualization of all of this, as we're moving our offices from Malibu up to the city of Oxnard, which is a 45-minute drive from Malibu these days, a lot of my employees are experiencing angst because their commute is going to increase. And so I've been unwilling to allow employees to work from home over the past few years. And recently I've shifted on that, and now we're creating work at home environments for, 5 of my employees to be able to do customer service and all the things that they currently do from one centralized office, to be able to log in a spare bedroom in their house 4 days a week and perform that same function at the same rate of pay, but now without the commute and without the angst of doing that. So I've been much more open to this whole work at home concept.
That's really interesting. In fact, the employer that I work for don't necessarily embrace that well, which I think is incredibly ironic given what you just said, and the productivity benefits, I think, that come from that. Why do you think so many people are stuck in that mindset of, you've got to be seen and come to the office?
The cynic in me says because people are lazy and they don't want to work, and so they'll be sloughing off and doing who knows what when there's nobody watching them. But the pragmatist in me says, well, all I'm asking is productivity, and I have a certain set of objectives I want to get from these people, and whether they're sloughing off at the office when nobody's watching or at home, as long as they get their work done, exactly. At the end of the year, they're going to be judged on their productivity, and if they want to keep their job, they'll be productive. Now, what I've noticed already from the, I think 4 people that I already have who are working remotely, they're on the computer at 6:30 in the morning sometimes, or 11:15 at night, doing tasks that are part of their job description. So that's kind of gratifying and that's how I work too. So I'm more open to this because I work in blocks of time where I'm getting very productive for an hour or two, and then I'm not. Then I'm doing something else, right? So as long as I can see my employees generating results, I'm fine. I'm fine with that.
Well, what's the kind of optimal? Have you found there to be like an optimal length of time where that you work for, that you're most productive in, and then after, say, 90 minutes, you then unplug and change focus and then come back? Is there a certain amount of time that is optimal for you?
It's all just sort of how I'm feeling in the moment. Sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's 3 hours. I can get into a project and drill down and for 3 hours be totally focused and on point. Other times, 10 minutes of something is too much, and I got to take a break. I walk away. I have a slack line in my backyard, so I'll go maybe do a couple of minutes of slack line or something, or go, just go outside and breathe some fresh air.
What's the slack line? What is that? Sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, it's like a tightrope walking device. Oh,
yeah.
So it's a balancing kind of thing that it's all the rage here on the West Coast.
It sounds cool. In the last 10 years, when have you felt the most successful?
Right now. Really?
What? Yep. Why is that?
I feel successful every day. So every day I wake up, it's almost like, first of all, I have an awesome wife, 2 awesome kids who never cease to amaze me in terms of their wisdom, their sense of humor, their empathy, their humanity. And those are really important elements for me to label as having success. In terms of business, my business continues to grow. So every day I feel like, okay, this is the most successful I've felt right now. And, I've done a lot of things in my life. So I have a lot of little things that I've ticked off on the boxes, right, that would be considered success. So, I would not change that. I feel the most successful right now.
What would you say you're really not very good at?
Organizing paperwork. I don't like filling out forms. I don't like organizing. I don't like doing applications. I hate filing. In fact, I'm the worst filer there is. And, so that's just doesn't appeal to me.
I don't think that's too problematic. You can always outsource that, which I think is probably what you do a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Have you got time for a couple more rapid fire questions? I know we're coming closer to the. Okay, so tell me something that you believe quite strongly to be true that almost nobody else agrees with you on. And that doesn't have to be health and fitness, but I would be interested in hearing it in that context as well.
Well, I'm going to give you a business one.
Cool.
I've been harping on this. I think the retail equities market is a fool's game. And I think a lot of people would disagree, but I think it's a rigged. That buying stocks, buying pieces of paper that represent fractional interest in existing companies and thinking that you're helping the economy is a fool's game. And I've kind of considered even writing a book on this in the coming in the future. So,
what's led you to that realization? What is it? Something you
well,
read or experienced?
No. I mean, there's a lot of different factors. One of which is that I live in California, which is a high tax state, and I put a lot of my hard earned money on which I paid a lot of taxes. I put that money at risk, starting new businesses. So I'm an angel investor. So I invest in startup companies, and I invest in companies where the money I give them is actually going to create jobs and to rent buildings and buy new widgets and create new products and things like that. So it's not that I'm just trying to again speculate on a piece of paper that I can sell it to a greater fool, 2 years later, that same piece of paper. So I look at this from the perspective of the value of entrepreneurship and the value of investing in businesses that don't exist yet or that are getting started. And I looked at it in the context of taxes, thinking, well, is it fair that I pay 60 cents of every dollar I make to a governmental agency and take the 40 cents that's left and invest that in a high risk business because I believe in the business, but there's a good chance I'm going to lose it, and then have to pay 50% taxes on whatever I make on that. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I started kind of looking at all of the ways in which we do things here, and I've lost a fair amount of money investing in the so-called conservative portfolios and the mutual funds in what I call the retail stock market. That is where people are paying retail prices for pieces of paper that represent fractional ownership in large corporations. And these corporations don't get the money. They don't get the benefit of the money that you paid for that stock. They've long since finished their IPO. And anyway, so to think that the health of the economy is based on what a handful of rich white guys in Wall Street or Bond Street. Where's your Wall Street equivalent in London?
Oh God, probably be like Liverpool Street or something like that.
But a handful of guys are pegging the value of this paper, and then the rest of the world is judging the health of the economy and the strength of nations. It blows my mind that's what we've come to. So, but see, I'm one of the few people that's where I'm at.
No, that's interesting. I don't know much about that, in honesty, and it's I was not expecting an answer, so it's interesting to hear your opinion on that. Do you mind also answering that in the context of health and fitness as well? Something that you believe to be true that most people disagree with you on in that context? Maybe in the paleo sphere?
Yeah. I mean, I've said for the longest time that humans are born as obligate fat burners, and we're supposed to be burning fat most of our lives. And that fat is the preferred fuel of humans. And, most doctors and dietitians and nutritionists would argue that glucose is the ubiquitous preferred fuel.
Right. Okay. So obviously, Mark, most people know who you are and know your website and resources. But just for those few that don't, what is the best way for people to contact you or find out more about your businesses? marksdailyapple.com is the main website. primalblueprint.com is the e-commerce site. You can buy the books. You can find out about our products there. You can sign up for the Primal Blueprint Expert Certification Program, which is soon to be relabeled the Primal Health Coaching Program, where we're going to teach people how to make a living coaching others.
with this technology that we've developed. And primalkitchenrestaurants.com if you're interested in the restaurant business.
Yeah, I want to take a closer look at the Primal Kitchen because there's some really interesting products there. And having reread Primal Blueprint, I do want to say that I'm always really impressed with your writing, Mark, and it's written in a way which is very layman friendly, but there's plenty of science underpinning it, and it's just really easy and very inspirational to read. So I do encourage people to check out your stuff. For all the show notes, resources, links, everything that Mark and I have mentioned, please hop over to corpwarrior.com. That's CORP warrior.com, which will redirect you to the homepage, and you'll be able to check all of that out. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time today to come on to the podcast. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed the conversation. We've chopped it up a little bit, obviously, into these various different topics, and hopefully one day we could do a part 2 and perhaps really get into business a bit more or a different topic.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lawrence.
Have a great day. Cheers, Mark. Yeah. Bye.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by hituni.com. That's hituni.com. HitUni is an e-learning course provider specializing in high-intensity training for personal trainers and for people looking to learn how to apply the principles of HIIT to their own training for best results. It comes highly recommended by Body by Science author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, MedX Precision Fitness owner Blair Wilson, HIIT expert Drew Bay, and the founder of Living La Vida Low Carb, Jimmy Moore. It was founded by author and high-intensity training master personal trainer Simon Shawcross. Simon has 15 years experience and has supervised over 15,000 workouts. Due to a combination of demand and a lack of quality in certification programs in the fields of high-intensity training, Simon and his team spent the last 3 years developing top-quality courses that will educate fitness professionals and participants to enable them to train individuals and themselves in the safest manner and produce best results. HIIT Uni has been put together using knowledge from the very best minds in the field of exercise, including Skylar Tanner, James Steele, Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, John Little, Mike Mensa, Arthur Jones, Dr. Ellington Darden, and many more. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace and convenience. The online video presentations are engaging and make learning fun. Online support and a discussion forum are provided to resolve any sticking points and enable you to share ideas and ask for help. Depending on whether you want to become a personal trainer, are already a personal trainer who wants to upskill, or if you're a keen HIIT participant that is eager to learn more about how you can apply HIIT to your own workouts for maximum benefit, there are several great value courses to choose from. I am personally partway through the PT course and I'm really enjoying it. I primarily wanted to do the course to learn more about how to apply HIIT to my own training for better results. The courses are really easy to follow and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's hituni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, hituni.com, pick your course and enter the coupon code CW10. Thanks very much for your support.